Welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think. My name is Ariane Rice. I am an ordained Episcopal priest and leadership coach, and I host conversations with professionals in the church and outside the church to talk about leadership, spirituality, and how we live into who we are becoming in our work and in the world. I am thrilled and delighted that you are here. So let's get started. Hello, greetings. Thank you so much for pressing play and listening. It is exciting to be recording again after what I thought would be just a pause, but then it turned into a season, and it quite naturally allowed me to close one chapter known as Season 1 and start again with Season 2 of Conversations and Reflections. I am excited and grateful. Thank you so much for being here. Now, perhaps you know the Irish philosopher and poet John O'Donoghue, who died far too young in 2008. He has a poem. Well, he has many poems and some beautiful books, but one of his poems is titled For a New Beginning, and I commend it to you in its entirety, but I'm just going to read a brief section. Now, as the title makes clear, it is an encouragement, a prayer of blessing in my interpretation, for when you are just at the start, the beginning of a new beginning, because you said yes to a calling, an out-of-the-way place in your heart, as he says at the start of the poem, that just resonates, not only with who you are, but maybe more importantly, with who you want to be. It's when you step out on that way, that path that feels bigger than just you. And even though you don't know how and you can't say how, you know that following this path is going to be wonderful. But you're aware on some level that it's probably going to be hard at times too. And in ways that maybe you can imagine, but also in ways you can never imagine. Once you get started and go down that road, where it will lead will not just change you, it will transform who you are and how you are in the world. Though your destination is not yet clear, he writes, you can trust the promise of this opening. Now, this episode will drop, as they say, on September 13th. And 3 days after that, on the 16th, will be a day of promise, of a new beginning for my guest, and I am going to let her tell you all about it. But I just want to say I am most grateful that Bishop Carrie made time, and I'm also grateful for the openness she brought to my questions and my responses. And you know what, my friend? I was nervous in a way I was unexpected to be for this conversation, so apologies for my awkward opening. Beginnings can prompt so many different feelings for us to think about. So let's begin with today's conversation. Hi, Bishop Carrie.
Hello, it's good to see you.
It is great to see you. I am excited for this conversation. You're going to be and kind of already are my new boss, so I'm a little bit nervous about the conversation.
I wish I could make you less nervous, but you know, we all are feeling beings.
That's exactly right. So thank you so much for making time to have this intentional conversation about some of those feelings and what we think. And with that, I would just ask you to introduce yourself. Just tell us who you are and what you do in the world and how you do it these days.
My name is Carrie Schofield-Broadbent, and for people who really like titles, they will call me Bishop-elect Carrie, or some of them just call me Bishop Carrie already, even though I have not been ordained and consecrated as bishop yet. But since it's a becoming, it feels right. And I have just moved to Maryland, and I love it here. I've spent most of my adult life in upstate New York, and I'm loving being here. So what I do in the world, and who I was created to be, is somebody who is not afraid of difficult conversations, somebody who cares deeply for the world, and someone who loves to connect to God and other people. And the way I'm doing that in my vocation is by being called to be the next Bishop of Maryland. And I'm thrilled with this call. And I live the vocation out in other ways too. I'm a hobby potter. I'm a mom and a spouse and a friend and a sister.
Thanks. Okay. I'm gonna have to hone in my thinking because, it occurs to me that, you're in a liminal space. You just said, you're in a process of becoming an official office. And we do that in the church in a pretty ritualized way, in a very public way. What's it like being in that liminal space and also moving? What's that like for you these days?
It's been a lot better and richer than I expected it to be. And it's been less hard than I expected it to be. I'm someone that really enjoys change and new things. So this is sparking a lot of excitement in me. There's certainly some sadness with letting go of things in Syracuse. I'm spending some way more time away from my family this year than I normally do. There's a lot of richness and learning in this time too. And I feel a freedom in being the new person too, that I don't need to know everything right away.
Talk a little bit about that freedom. I think that's a really important quality to notice and then to kind of maintain even.
So freedom is the lens I'm choosing to look at it with right now, that I can say, I don't know, pretty honestly about a lot of things. So the bar is set lower at first, I think, in terms of my just technical knowledge of what's going on. Sometimes I do feel frustrated by that gap. I want to have all of this knowledge at my fingertips. I want to know the people I'm working with. I want to know their stories. I want to know the congregations and communities. I want to know every corner of Maryland. And I just can't get from here to there by skipping over that learning process.
Right.
And so I'm trying to embrace it and feel a sense of freedom that as I learn.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. And also to me speaks to how it encourages curiosity without any shame.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's not a whole lot of room for shame.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. Okay, so I had mentioned to you the couple things that I was really curious about. One of which has to do before you were called into ministry. When I look at your CV, it tells me that you went to college to study conflict studies and peace. Okay, so I would love to know what calls somebody into studying that.
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting story. And it ties into my church life too. I've been Episcopalian for a long time, and I was a part of a little tiny church that I was the youth representative on vestry. Not to brag or anything.
Well, you got introduced to committee life nice and early.
Yeah, and I'm still doing it. So we had a major conflict in my small church between the vestry, which is, the governing boards of our churches, and the priest, the head rector. And I could feel the tension. I wasn't getting all the information because I was a kid, but I could feel the tension. And one of the things that the church did, and I don't know who started it, is they brought in conflict resolution consultants to teach us how to listen to each other. They taught us reflective listening. They held this process in space so that we could really talk and hear each other. And I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
There's people that can help us have difficult conversations when we are so spun up in our feelings and entrenched in our positions. And I've always been a pacifist, and so wanted to go into international relations. Didn't want to study economics, although now I think that would be fascinating. So peace and conflict studies brought in my core value and deep love of peace, which is connected to my faith, and also the technical help of conflict resolution. And I just loved it.
That's making me think about how one of the things sometimes I think about when, as rector of a congregation, when I'm going to ask somebody to do something with me, hopefully say yes to an invitation to serve in a leadership role, is in a way I know they might have to see behind the curtain. They might have to see that, it's the church and God is love and God loves everybody and we don't all agree and we don't all get along because it's also work. It's church and there's work aspects to it. And I just wonder, that is so incredible that you had such a formative experience when you were a teenager to see the church as work and a place where people worked something out. Did it come to a resolution?
There was a resolution, but the priest did not stay. It was a pretty high level conflict.
Right.
There was a lot of factions. Before the conflict resolution people came in, but we learned a lot in it. And I think they were able to minimize some of the damage.
What were some of the things that when you went into studying it were kind of mind blowing, awarenesses for you?
In studying nonviolent social change, the methodology, the intentionality, the undergirding of that movement of so many core values, practicing nonviolence, training people, that this is something that is countercultural in many places in our world. I think nonviolent social change is completely in line with the gospel. But we have to learn how to do it.
Yes.
And so all of that intentionality I thought was wonderful. And I could really see God at work in that. And conflict resolution for me it's interesting to be talking about that here on Feeling Beings Who Think, because it's such an interesting bringing together of our thoughts and our feelings. It is not a discipline or a study that can ignore feelings at all. And we also have to just meld those things really interestingly in conflict resolution.
Yeah. I mean, you're also speaking to something. We want to believe certain behaviors come naturally to us and they don't. We have to kind of learn them. One of the things that will be familiar to you and certainly some people listening is the College for Congregational Development, which is a big part of your background. I just did my first week in June and was kind of overwhelmed by all the models I was taught. Some of which were not. There's a lot. All of which were great. Some of which were familiar to me, some of which brand new. But one thing they all had in common was this is a framework. This is a model. And if it speaks to you and your community, you will have to learn it. You will have to practice it. You will have to probably find somebody to guide you in that process. So I'm of course now a little bit curious. So then tell me the story between the conflict resolution training and the call to ministry. And also I'm curious if you think that mindset around frameworks and models and learning has always been a part of the institutional church or something that is kind of we're coming into or becoming more aware of utilizing. Because in my coaching world and in that colleague group, adult development theory and how we utilize that in organizations, leadership and organizational development is so prevalent.
Yeah. I think I'll go with that last question first, and then I might need prompts for the first ones. But no, it's okay. It's all really rich. I mean, formation, education, learning has always been part of the religious life and the Christian story. I think about Jesus teaching as he went. And what I think I'm seeing now is an expansion of the ways that people can engage with learning. So it's not just books. We have podcasts. It's not just conversations with the people in your church. We have other ways of connecting. I see the church, I think, embracing more ways of learning and formation and expanding what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
It could be just that I'm getting to know the church better. What's your experience?
I agree with you in terms of what I'm seeing. And again, I don't always know if that's just part of my own personal journey. So I'm more attuned to it and I see it more readily. And that could certainly be true. I think as in any line of work, we enter different phases of development as professionals. And now that I've been doing this for over 15 years, that has changed my eyesight. And one of the things I'm noticing that I think is also part of your background, you were with a community for, I think, 12 or 13 years in upstate New York. And I think staying with a community, which is now part of my experience in a way that I didn't actually anticipate, I think that shifts too, because you grow in a depth of relationship, not just with individuals, but with a community that's always evolving.
Mm-hmm. I have a story to tell about that,
please,
if I can. So several years ago, when my kids were younger, it was back to school time and I sent them off to school and I was feeling mushy and emotional. And I wrote a back to school prayer on social media. One of those kind of mommy blogger vibes, right? And it was shared very widely by like 11 people. and it got back to the folks in my hometown. My hometown is Marcellus, New York, which is a half an hour outside of Syracuse, New York. And so grew up in Marcellus, and now as a grown up, I lived in Syracuse, so not too far away. So the prayer got back to my hometown. And a woman I had gone to church with at that little church that had the conflict. And she said, "Oh, Care, we love that prayer. And we would love for you to lead a Bible study with our women's group." I was like, "Sure, that sounds great." She said, "Kathy's going to reach out to you." And okay, that's great. Kathy and I graduated together. Kathy said, "I want you to come to this Bible study, Carrie. And you know right where it is. It's at Gina's house." So what? Gina's house? And she goes, "Yep, Gina lives in the house you grew up in."
Wow.
So it was a lovely invitation, but it spun me out.
I'll bet it did.
And I was like, okay, I understand myself to be created, to be a wanderer and an adventurer and someone who loves new things. And I am in central New York still. And I said to my husband, "Keith, I may be at the pinnacle of my career here. And you know what I'm doing? Leading a study at my house." And he, one of his gifts is being steadfast. And so, he said, "Carrie, what is going on?" And I was like, "Keith, God created me to be a wanderer and an adventurer. And here, what am I doing? Am I squandering my life?" And we're, trying to go to bed. And he's like, "Honey, what on earth do you think you'll find out there that you haven't found here?" I was like, "Oh, that's good." And I kept going. "But Keith, listen." And he finally said, "Carrie, you're just one of the lucky ones that didn't have to go very far to find the life that you wanted." And I thought that was rich.
Oh, it is quite rich. Just to tag on to the story. Mm-hmm. I remember being at the 4-year mark, I think, at Church of the Good Shepherd, and really being like, should I be looking? And I can so relate. I'm supposed to be doing this, and I was created for this, and I'm supposed to go to this next thing. And I think everybody listening can relate to that feeling. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was crossing the street at the time. I lived in the rectory, across the street from the church. And I crossed the street over the beautiful little babbling brook. And all I heard was God say, "But I gave you this."
Oh, that's beautiful. I was like,
boom. Because
I
was
got
just
chills.
Looking around at my surroundings and creation and walking across the street with a daughter at the bus stop at the end of the road. And you write a prayer for the reality of your life in that moment. The mature human being, writes Rowan Williams in his book, Where God Happens, is not the one who has the most choices available, but the one who apparently makes the fewest choices, who freely does what he or she is, without self-consciousness or self-assertion, without anxious fretting about what would be more authentic. End quote. What theologian Williams gets at here, I think, is the grace that is offered with every new beginning. It is that grace which helps us continually let go of all our anxious fretting, helps us pay more attention to those out-of-the-way places in our hearts, those calls that remind us to see that we really don't need to fret so much about our choices. We just need to trust more freely what you and I already are, without all that self-consciousness and constant need for self-assertion, because all around us is really everything that we could hope to gain. Maybe that is what we call born-again grace, or beginner's mind grace, or just one day at a time grace. If you are interested to discover the books and authors that inform my reflections on this podcast, and also support and guide me in all my work, then please, I invite you to check out my curated bookshelf at bookshop.org, where you can procure your own copy of Williams' book, and in doing so, support Feeling Beings. Because this podcast is a labor of love and a free offering. So, if you could take a moment to share or follow or like or all three, all of that would go a long way to supporting this endeavor too. And I would be most grateful. All right, thanks for taking this little break with me. And now let's get back to our conversation. So I think everything we're talking about also connects with what you said were the core values of ministry. So I'm just going to share with you what I have written down as your core values. And you tell me, maybe, and if it's a story, that's great. Which one really is top of mind. So there was truth and transparency, compassion and faithfulness, and trust and relationships.
Yeah. Oh, I could kind of talk about all of them. The one that's coming to mind right now is transparency. I hear that word used a lot, and I'm not always sure we all mean the same things when we use it. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'd be grateful for an opportunity to talk about how I understand transparency. The way I practice that is not by sharing everything. Mm-hmm. Because I don't like secrets, but I do keep confidences. I do maintain privacy with myself and other people. I do have boundaries, graceful, loving boundaries. Mm-hmm. And transparency for me looks like explaining, being clear about what questions I'm holding, even if I don't have the answers. Transparency to me means sharing with people why I've done what I've done. So that we can be on the same page. Mm-hmm. Transparency to me is sharing feedback, positive feedback, as well as feedback that can help people grow. I love receiving feedback, especially feedback that can help me grow. Mm-hmm. And I realize that as one ascends a hierarchy, which, let's face it, that's what this is.
Yep.
My access to people who are willing to tell me the truth gets further. I think one of the reasons I love being in Maryland is that I don't sense that that's a problem here. I sense that there will be people who will tell me the truth. There's people who want to be nice and make everything nice, and it comes from a good place. I don't think people are withholding. Yeah. Anyway, I guess that transparency and truth go together.
And what I heard in your explanation of transparency, again, those are learned qualities. How do you learn how to give feedback? I mean, I've had some humbling teaching shared with me in terms of ways I used to give feedback, and have learned ways to do it better. And what I also heard in that was a lot of communication, again, kind of circling back to those intentional conversations you learned. Is now a good time for feedback? What's the feedback I need to hear? How are we going to do affirmative inquiry towards the feedback? Like, what are all the ways we're going to pay attention to how we're doing that, and checking in with the transparency itself? Am I really hearing what you're saying? And do I take away the same meaning? Which to me leads very much to being compassionate. It is both self-compassionate and compassionate and faithful. So connect maybe those, because they're all interwoven to me too.
Yeah. The compassion piece, I hope when people think of a Christian, they think, well, of course they're compassionate. I realize that
not always the case.
Not always the case. But that compassion, I think, is part of being a child of God and a follower of Christ, is that we hold compassion, being kind, understanding where the other person is coming from. And I also understand in my role and in who I'm created to be that I'm called to have compassion, not just for the individual that's in front of me, but also the communities I care for, the systems I care for. And so when I think about making a difficult decision or having a difficult conversation, and that tiny part of me wants to see how I can get out of that, I always think of me standing in between this situation and a community of faith or a group of people. And I think, who's in my shadow? If I don't have this conversation, who am I blocking from getting the light? And so that, for me, that's a bit of how I have compassion, one lens through which I have compassion for a system and our communities too. Because sometimes it is hard to balance a compassion for a person and compassion for a group.
Oh, very much so. There's a lot of ways compassion. I mean, all of these words, even like what you just said, I hope when people think of the word Christian, they think of kind. And yet, Christianity seems very dogmatic often, when you're seeing it through media in particular, everything's sound bites, and it's very much us and them and division, and not this sort of comprehensive wanting to understand. I heard a Buddhist teacher not too long ago recommending to a group of Buddhists that they attend a festival, if for nothing else than to be in a space where there's at least 5,000 people from 50 different countries treating each other with kindness, because it happens and it's real and it's there. And you have to sometimes choose to go put yourself in places, where it is. So I want to talk about joy now.
Okay. Yeah. Then let's move on to joy.
I mean, there's a little part of me that wants to know if you know your Enneagram number, which is,
I do.
You're a 2.
No, I said I do know it.
Oh, you do?
I'm a 3 with a 2 wing. The achiever.
The achiever. Oh, of course you're.
I say with like cringing on my face.
I know. I'm a 1, which I say idealist perfectionist with cringing on my face. So
because only 1s and 3s would consider our numbers not great. We are going to be striving for the right number.
Well, that framework, I will say, is helping me be more compassionate in a lot of relationships as I try and understand other numbers' points of view, because they're not me.
Right.
Well, I think both 1 and 3 then have joy as part of their innate qualities. Is that part of who you've always been? Is that something you've grown into more? I want to hear the stories. I want to hear some of that about you.
It's something that I think I've always had, because I've never intentionally cultivated joy. It's part of who I am. It's part of how I live in the world. And I just genuinely really love the life that I get to live. And so I've received feedback in many different ways that joy is part of my ministry. This thing that just is a natural part of me seems to somehow connect and inspire other people in a way that God does. I don't.
Is there a part of scripture, or even, something outside of scripture, just a reading, something where you really find resonance with that?
One quote that comes to mind is by Maya Angelou. that I had taped to my desk in my first call to ministry. And it says, people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that rings true in my experience of being with other people. And it's something that I hold close to my heart. And I know that I don't always have to make people feel good.
Right.
Because sometimes things are hard. Sometimes there are things I can't fix, but that sticks with me. I also want to keep my joy. I want to keep it right sized in a sense, because I think sometimes joy and gratitude can be bullies, where people don't allow themselves to feel some deep, difficult feelings. I should be grateful.
Mm-hmm.
I know I just got diagnosed with cancer, but I'm glad it's not the bad kind.
Right.
You know? And so I think about that movie Inside Out.
Yes. Favorite.
I know, I love that one. And in the beginning, I mean, as a grown-up person in the world, was rooting for Joy to just run everything, which maybe will come as no surprise to you. And then as the movie unfolds and it becomes clear that other emotions have like actual good things to do too, I was like, oh yes. And so that's helped me be a more full human.
You know, one of the guests I'm very excited to have on the podcast is Professor Reverend James Farwell, who's was one of my liturgics professors. And he just came out with a book, Ritual. I don't want to get it. Oh, here it is. Ritual Excellence, Best Practices for Leading and Planning Liturgy, which, believe it or not, actually has things to say if you have nothing to do with standing on an altar. But the phrase I read last night that I cannot get rid of in my mind, to carry joyful solemnity. And what you were just saying, I often use the word joy at funerals because the combination of the joy and the sorrow, when people are able to share a story of a loved one and tears roll down their eyes as they're laughing, that's the joy that I'm talking about. And I think you're talking about. That
deep, abiding joy that comes with peace and depth. Yeah. That's a different breed from happy.
What are the qualities that connect with people that aren't spoken? All right. Well, here's one question that I'm curious about, because you have a big day coming up. It's a big day.
Do. We do. Yes.
We do. I'm excited. I'm very excited. And we've all been through big days. You got married. You got ordained twice, because that's what we do. You've been installed as rector, right? And I think as we grow, we recognize my whole life doesn't hang on this day. And, you know, once the day is done, the work is there. So what do you think you're carrying with you before and now and preparing? And probably maybe how has that even shifted as you've grown?
I'll start with a story. So I had a stress dream about the ordination and consecration.
I would think.
And my stress dreams are always ridiculous, as if my mind is doing improv with itself, auditioning for some like cut rate Saturday Night Live. And so, you know, I'm doing something and finally someone says, "Hey, Carrie, service is about to start." "What service?" "Well, this is the ordination and consecration." "Oh no, I'm wearing this silly outfit and I don't have my right vestments," which in Episcopal world, that's about as bad as you get. Having dreams about not the right vestment. And I look in the closet and all is hanging there is Barbie clothes. And then the closet falls down and, you know, it's all a mess. And I finally put on this old, faded, gigantic black cassock. I look down and I see all these bishops there. They were wearing Hawaiian shirts. I don't know why. There was about 30 people in this little church. And I just took a deep breath in my disgusting cassock, puffed up my chest, and walked down that aisle as proud as I could be to be able to be joining the people in Maryland in ministry. And so that dream has been like, well, it's not going to go like that.
No, it's not.
And wow, how about teamwork? No one can pull off a service like that.
No.
And to watch how well our team works, to watch how well the National Cathedral team works is wonderful. Everyone wants this to go well. And we all have each other. We're all kind of like grasping hands in this sturdy foundation to hold this thing. And it feels solid and it feels strong and it feels appropriate for this ministry.
What's vital to you about the way we do that in this line of work? The way we make ritual, ceremonial, liturgical when something is shifting? Why do you think that's important?
Not sure if this is exactly answering your question, but it's popping up for me right now. I can't think of a single person on this team who believes this day is about them or their piece is about them. Everyone is there to do their best for the whole. So, the person coordinating the ushers is not doing that to look good. The person, doing this isn't doing it so that they can get a promotion.
Right.
It's all for the greater good.
Oh, I love that. I mean, yeah, we are all God's field, God's building, building up.
And even me, my name is on the front of the bulletin and I'm going to have a prominent role in this liturgy, but I couldn't show up and do it by myself. Like this is the church ordaining and consecrating me. This is the action of God. And for me, this is our service of ordination and consecration. I'll be the one receiving that sacrament, but it's my dear hope that everyone will feel themselves empowered, inspired for ministry and work in the world.
Well, I'm excited to be a part of it. I'm excited to work together and in capacity of this diocese. And I really want to thank you for making time to be on this little podcast of mine and trusting that what we share and the stories we share goes into the world and speaks to people.
And I'm grateful for your work in this world. I don't know how I found this podcast. I did. And I started listening to it a while ago. And it wasn't until probably March that I realized you were
I met you
in the Diocese of Maryland. And I was like, oh, and I met you and I felt like I was meeting a superstar.
You want to make a number one feel good? Say like, wait, you're Arian Rice. I listened to your podcast. Are you kidding? That lit me up from the inside out.
I was like, oh my
gosh. Well, thank you. Blessings, good energies, all the things as you move towards the big day and till we see each other again.
Sounds great. Thank you. Many blessings to you and to all of your listeners.